Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will discuss about the respiration in plants. We have completed the chapter, that one is the respiration in the animals. So we revise the respiration in plants. You know that how animals respire, same things plants also respire because they are also living animals and they also need energy to do their they may be static, but there are also some internal mechanism also occurs in their body, so that's why they also need the energy, and they get the energy just like us from the food, and they also respire because without oxidation the glucose does not break down and any type of energy will be released from the carbohydrate types food. All of us breathe to live, but why breathing is so essential of life? What happens when we breathe? Also, do all living organisms including plants and microbes breathe? If so, and why? Why? Obviously, why do we need breathe? Not only we have to take the oxygen and carbon dioxide, we have to remove that from our body. That is not because we need that oxygen to break down our food, to release the energy, because without that energy we cannot do any work. All living organisms need energy for carry out daily life activities, be it absorption, transport, movement, reproduction or even breathing. Where does all the energy come from? We know we eat food for energy, but how is this energy taken from food? How the energy is utilized? Do all food gives the same amount of energy? Where do plants get their energy from? And microorganisms for their energy requirements, do they eat food? You may wonder that several questions raised above, they may seem to be very disconnected, but in reality the process of breathing is very much connected to the process of release of energy from food. Let us try and understand how this happens. All the energy required for life process is obtained by the oxidation of the some macromolecules, and we call food. All green plants and we need the breathing is the one type the process, just intake and goes out the carbon dioxide and intake of oxygen. This process for that is known as the breathing. Breathing is important for to reaching the oxygen to the different parts of the cell. And why the oxygen and what is the respiration? Respiration is the mechanism where the oxidation of food occurs to release the energy, because this energy is very much important for us. And in the case of the green plants, we know that they also get their energy by the, because we are dependent on the green plants for our food, but the green plants and they can produce their own food, so that's why they also need the oxygen to break down that food to release the energy. And the main, that is glucose, sucrose, fructose, that is present in the green plants in the form of the carbohydrates, that is the raw materials of the, mainly the glucose is the raw materials for the energy release or oxidation of the respiration of the food. Okay, so all the energy required for life process is obtained by the oxidation of some macromolecules that we call food. Only green plants and carbohydrate can prepare their own food by the process of photosynthesis. They trap light energy and convert it into the chemical energy. Very easy, you know that what is the, you are very familiar with the photosynthesis, so that's why they just only take the light energy, converted into the chemical energy, and that is captured by the chlorophyll to produce the food, that is the carbohydrates. The chloroplast, the most often located the superficial layer, carry out photosynthesis. Hence, even the green plants, all other organ, tissue and cells are not green, need for the oxidation. Food has to be translocated to non-green plants. Animals are heterotrophic, they obtain food from the, so green plants, they are maximum the leaves are green and some young stem, that not all parts of the any plants is green. So many plants also they are totally green, but the, if you see that hair plants or any type of big plant, their body is covered by the bark, that part is not green. So when the green part, which part is the root part, which part is not green, then the photosynthesis occurs in the green parts of the plants, and then the food transported to the non-green parts of the plants. And animals, we are also heterotrophic, we are also directly indirectly depends for the food on the plants, because some herbivores they intake the plants type food directly, but we depends on the herbivores but some plant products for our food. So directly indirectly we are also depend on the plants. Saprophytes, they are also maybe taking dead and decaying animals, but that animals also depend on the plants. What is the important to recognize that ultimately all the food that is required for life process come from the photosynthesis. This chapter deals with the cellular respiration for the mechanism of breakdown of food materials within the cell to release energy and tapping this energy for the synthesis of the ATP. So what is the cellular respiration? Cellular respiration name, that is respiration, but it occurs only in the cells of the body. So that is known as the, because the respiration occurs mainly cells of the body. And cellular respiration where the food material, that is carbohydrates, breakdowns with the help of the oxygen that we intake by the breath and produce carbon dioxide, hydrogen and energy. This process is known as the cellular respiration. And release the energy means in the form of the ATP. Aerobic anaerobic respiration occurs. In aerobic respiration, that is 38 molecule ATP is produced. In anaerobic respiration, 2 molecule ATP is produced. Photosynthesis of course takes place within the chloroplast, in whereas the breakdown of complex molecules to yield energy takes place in the cytoplasm and in the mitochondria. In the cytoplasm and the mitochondria, the breaking down of carbon-carbon bond of complex compounds through oxidation within the cell, leading to release the considerable amount of energy, is called respiration. And so what is the respiration? Carbohydrate foods breakdown. So that's why carbon bond must be present. So breakdown of the carbon-carbon bond of the food material to release the energy. Okay. So the breaking of the carbon-carbon bond complex compounds through oxidation within the cell, leading to release of considerable amount of energy, is known as the respiration. The compound that oxidizes during the process is known as the respiratory substrate. So respiratory substrate means the compound that used for releasing the energy. That is glucose, that is the carbohydrates, because we use glucose to release the energy from that part. Usually carbohydrates are oxidized to release energy, but protein, fats, even the organic acid can be used as respiratory substances in the some plants. Under the respiratory substrate is not released free into the cell in a single enzyme, and it trapped as the chemical energy in the form of ATP. Hence, it is important to understand that energy released by the oxidation in the synthesis of ATP, which is broken down wherever, and hence ATP act as the energy currency of the cell. The energy trapped in the ATP is utilized in various energy requiring process of organism, and carbon skeleton produced during the respiration used as the precursor of biosynthesis of the macromolecules of the cell. So this is only the mainly the respiration important for the release of the energy, and that occurs with the help of the oxidation, and oxidation occurs when the oxygen get inside your body. Do plant breathe? Obviously plant must be breathe. They are also living, they must be breathe. If we don't breathe, how could you prove that we are? Just like reproduction, just like breathing, just like the food mechanism, that is the energy, movement, transport, absorption, all these things, breathing is also one of the most important life process. So without breathe, any living organism cannot survive. That's maybe plant, that's maybe animal. Well, the answer this question is not quite so direct. But plants require O2 for respiration to occur. They also give out CO2. Hence, plants have system in the plants that ensure the availability of the O2. Plants, unlike animals, have no specialized organ for the gaseous exchange, but they have stomata and lenticels for this purpose. So plants, they don't have any type of particular respiratory organ, just like us, the lungs and the respiratory tract, that is not present in the plant, but there is some small spores are present, that is known as the stomata and the lenticels. They helps in their gaseous exchange. There are several reasons why plants cannot get along without respiratory organs. Each plant parts take care of its own gaseous exchange need. There are very little transport of gases from one plant to another. Second, plant do not present great demand of gaseous exchange. So why respiratory organ not present in the plant's body? Why need in our body? Because they are not too much energy required. We move, we intake food, we do hard work, but plants, they are static. So that's why the small amount of energy they require. So that's why they need the small amount of the, and that gaseous exchange that maybe occurs in there through the stomata and lenticels. And each parts of the plants, not only the leaves, stomata and the lenticels, all parts of the plants helps in their respiration. Root, stem, leaves respire at the rates far lower than the animals do. Only during photosynthesis large volume of gases exchange and leaf adapted to take care of own needs during this period. When cell photosynthesis, availability of O2 is not a problem, then the cell's O2 is released within the cell. Third, distance the gases must be diffused even in large bulky plant is not great. Each living cell in a plant is located under quite close to surface of the plant. This is true for the leaves. So the plants can respire through the stomata and lenticels, the young parts of the plants, that is the stem, young stem, leaves, they contain the stomata and lenticels, so that's why they can gaseous exchange. But the plants that getting older, they have the covering of the bark, so how do they respire? Their body also contain the small pore that is known as the lenticels. They also respire through the lenticels. The cells in the interior and dead and provide only mechanical support. Thus, most cells of the plant have at least a part surface in contact with air. This is also facilitated by losing packing of parenchyma cells in the leaves, stem and root. This provide an interconnected network of the airspace. We have so much channels to respire, to transport the food, to transport the gases. But thus, in the plant's body, there is some intercellular spaces are present that helps in the transport of gases from one part to another parts. Okay, C6 in the complete combustion of the glucose, that is the CO2 and H2, and you know that after the completion of the respiration, the glucose and oxygen, that is C6H12O6 plus 6O2, that is 6 CO2 plus 6 H2 plus energy. That is the main respiration, because this is produced, and this is the catabolic pathway respiration, that is breaking down of the complex type of the food occurs. If this energy is useful to the cell, it should be able to utilize to synthesis her molecules the cell requires. The strategy that the plants uses to catabolize the glucose molecule in such a way that not all liberated energy goes out of the as heat. Obviously, that means that 38 molecules ATP is produced. They need immediately. They obviously spend that the total amount of energy never. They required, the cells required as much as they can intake from that ATP. Not all parts of the ATP are used as the heat. Okay. The key is that oxidized glucose is not one step but several small steps, enabling some step to be just large enough such that energy released can be coupled to ATP synthesis. How this is done is essentially the story of the respiration. During the process of respiration, oxygen is utilized and carbon dioxide, water and energy is released as the products. The combustion, obviously combustion always occurs with the help of, without oxygen combustion. Combustion means breakdown. That is one type of the breaking down with the help of the oxygen is known as the combustion. Combustion must be occur when the oxygen is present. The reaction requires oxygen, but the some cells where oxygen may or may not be available. That's why aerobic and anaerobic respiration, when the oxygen is present, the total breakdown of glucose occurs, but when the anaerobic respiration occurs, that is the partial breakdown of the glucose is occurred. There is the sufficient reason to believe that the first cells on this planet live in the atmosphere that lacked oxygen. Even in the anaerobic condition, some of these organisms are facultative anaerobic, while in the other require for the anaerobic condition is obligate. In any case, all living organisms retain the enzymatic machinery, partially oxidize glucose without the help of the oxygen. The breakdown of glucose to pyruvic acid is known as the glycolysis. So, splitting of the glucose, the breakdown of the glucose, and after the breaking down of the glucose, that is the production of the pyruvic acid. This process is known as the glycolysis, and glycolysis must be occur in the cytoplasm. Thus, respiration process total occurs in the two places. First one in the cytoplasm and second one in the mitochondria. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm and mitochondria. Inside the mitochondria, Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. These both are occurs in the mitochondria. Glycolysis. Glycolysis has originated from the Greek word glucose. Glucose splitting is known as the glycolysis. The glycolysis is given by the Gustav Emden, Otto Meyerhof and J. Parnes, and it is often referred to as the EMP pathway. So, what is the EMP pathway? Emden, Meyerhof, Parnes pathway. Another name of the glycolysis is EMP pathway. The anaerobic organism, it is the only process in the respiration. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell and present in all living organisms. In this process, glucose undergoes partial oxidation to form the two molecule pyruvic acid. So, first glycolysis occurs, then the glucose partially oxidized, then they produce pyruvic acid. Then the pyruvic acid goes to the either aerobic condition, either anaerobic condition. Okay. Plant glucose is derivated from the sucrose, which is the end product of the photosynthesis from the storage carbohydrate. Sucrose is converted into glucose and fructose by the enzyme invertase, and these two monosaccharides readily enter the glycolytic pathway. Glucose and fructose are the photophosphorylated to give rise to glucose 6-phosphate by the activity of the enzyme hexokinase. The phosphorylase of first one glucose to 6-phosphate. Okay, that is occurs by the help of the enzyme. The name of the enzyme, hexokinase. Next one, the phosphorylated form of the glucose, that isomerase the produce fructose 6-phosphate. So glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate, that is isomerization occurs. So that is isomerase enzymes helps in the production of the fructose 6-phosphate. Subsequent step of the metabolism of glucose and fructose are the same. Various steps of glycolysis are depicted. In glycolysis, a chain of 10 reactions under the control of different enzymes takes place to produce pyruvate from the glucose. While studying the step of glycolysis, please note the step at which utilization or synthesis of ATP, NADH plus H plus takes place. ATP is utilized as two-phase, first in the conversion of glucose into the glucose 6-phosphate and second. So first two step, glucose to glucose 6-phosphate and fructose 6 to fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. These two steps produce ATP from the ADP. The fructose 1,6-bisphosphate is split into dihydroxyacetone phosphase, 3-phosphoglyceraldehyde. Okay, 3-dihydroxyacetone phosphate and PGAL, phosphoglyceraldehyde. And we find that there are one step, NADH plus H plus is formed from NAD plus. This is when the 3-phosphoglyceraldehyde is converted to 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. Two redox equivalent are removed from the PGL and transferred to a molecule NAD plus. PGL is oxidized and with ignoring phosphate to get converted into BPGA. The conversion of BPGA to 3-phosphoglyceric acid is also an energy yielding process. This energy is trapped by the formation of ATP. Another ATP is synthesized during the conversion of PEP to pyruvic acid. Can you then how many ATP molecule directly synthesized in the pathway? Pyruvic acid is then the pre-product of the glycolysis. What is the metabolic fate of the pyruvate? That depends on the. So after the glycolysis, the pyruvic acid is produced, but what happened after the production of the pyruvic acid and what is the fate of the pyruvate? That depends on the cell. If that goes to the aerobic respiration, then carbon dioxide, water, energy must be produced. If that goes to the lactic acid, the muscle cell, if there is the lack of oxygen is present, anaerobic respiration present, they must be maybe produce lactic acid, they may be produce the alcohol. Okay. This lactic acid fermentation, alcoholic fermentation and aerobic respiration. The fermentation takes place under the anaerobic condition in many prokaryotes and unicellular eukaryotes. For the complete oxidation of glucose to CO2 and H2O, however, organism adopt Krebs cycle, which is also called aerobic respiration. This respire O2 supply. Okay, so in fermentation, say by yeast, the incomplete oxidation of glucose is fermentation means breaking down of the glucose to the alcohol, and breaking down of glucose to alcohol occurs by the help of the microorganism. So this process is known as the fermentation. That is one type owner. The another name of the anaerobic respiration that occurs in the microorganism, mainly in the yeast body, that is known as the fermentation. Glucose or sugar break down into the alcohol. Okay. And there is the three types of the fermentation occurs: alcoholic fermentation, lactic acid fermentation, cellulosic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation, when pyruvic acid present in the yeast body, then it break down the glucose and produce ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, water. When the fermentation, the glucose present in the lactobacillus bacteria or muscle cells, then the absence of the oxygen, lactic acid plus energy is produced. That is known as the lactic fermentation. And cellulosic fermentation, you know that ruminating stomach, rumen, which take the cellulose direct from the plants, their rumen, rectum, some bacteria, there is cellulose is break down into the, that is one of type of the carbohydrate. Fatty acid, that's maybe lactic acid, and methane, that is known as the, and carbon dioxide, that is known as the cellulosic fermentation. Okay. Fermentation. In fermentation, say by yeast, the incomplete oxidation of glucose is achieved under the condition by sets the reaction where pyruvic acid is converted into the CO2 and ethanol. The enzyme pyruvic acid decarboxylase and alcoholic dehydrogenase catalyze this reaction. Other the step involved shown in the animals also cell muscles during the exercise when oxygen is inadequate for cellular respiration. Pyruvic acid is reduced to lactic acid by lactose dehydrogenase. Okay, so pyruvic acid product in the which enzyme helps? Lactose dehydrogenase, alcohol dehydrogenase. So dehydrogenase enzyme helps in the fermentation. The reducing agent NADH plus H plus, which is reoxidized NAD plus in both the process. In both lactic acid and alcoholic fermentation, not much energy is released, less than the 7% of the energy in glucose is released, and not all is happen as high energy bonds of the ATP. Also the processes are hazardous, either acid or alcohol is produced. What is the net ATP? That is the synthesis and deducted the number of ATP utilized during the glycolysis when one molecule glucose is fermented to alcohol or lactic acid. Yeast poison themselves to death when the concentration of alcohol reaches about 30%, when it would be maximum concentration of alcohol beverages that are naturally fermented. How do you think alcoholic beverages of alcohol content greater than its concentration is obtained? When then is the process by which organism can be carry out complete oxidation of glucose and extract the energy stored to synthesis a large number of ATP molecules of cellular metabolism. In eukaryotes, these steps takes place within the mitochondria, and this requires O2. Aerobic respiration is the process that leads to a complete oxidation of organic substances in the presence of oxygen and release of CO2, water and large. Only the aerobic respiration is the, because in the anaerobic respiration partial oxidation of glucose present, but the aerobic respiration is the respiration where the complete digestion or complete breakdown of the glucose occurs and carbon dioxide, water and energy will be produced. And this aerobic respiration common in the higher organism. We will take this process in the next section. Next, anaerobic respiration. What is anaerobic respiration? That is, for aerobic respiration to take place within the mitochondria, the final product is the glycolysis. Obviously, when the aerobic respiration occurs, the final product is the glycolysis. Pyruvate is transported from the cytoplasm. Then, when the glycolysis pyruvate is produced in the cytoplasm, this pyruvate goes to the mitochondria for the Krebs cycle, TCA cycle, that you can say that, and electron transport chain. Cytoplasm in mitochondria, the crucial events in the aerobic respiration are the complete oxidation of pyruvate by the stepwise removal of all the hydrogen atoms, leaving the molecules of CO2. The passing on the electrons removed as the part of hydrogen atoms the molecular O2 with the simultaneous synthesis of the ATP. What is interesting to note that the first process takes place in the matrix of the mitochondria, while the second process is located in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Pyruvate, which is formed by the glycolytic catabolism of carbohydrates in the cytosol, after its entrance, mitochondrial matrix undergo oxidative decarboxylation by complete sets of the reaction catalyzed by pyruvic dehydrogenase. By the complex set of reaction catalyzed by pyruvic dehydrogenase, the reaction catalyzed by pyruvic dehydrogenase require the participation of several coenzymes including NAD+ and coenzyme A. Pyruvic acid, coenzyme A plus NAD+, magnesium, pyruvate dehydrogenase, acetyl-CoA, CO2, NADH+ and H+, that will be produced in the anaerobic respiration. During this process, two molecules NADH are produced from the metabolism of two molecules of pyruvic acid, and the acetyl-CoA then enters into the cyclic pathway, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, more commonly called Krebs cycle, after the scientist Hans Krebs who first elucidated it. Then they enter into the Krebs cycle, dicarbolic acid cycle. The TCA cycle start with the concentration of the acetyl group with the oxaloacetic acid. So OAA, oxaloacetic acid, helps the for starting the TCA cycle. Then the water to L citric acid. The reaction is catalyzed by the enzyme citrate synthesis and a molecule of CoA is released. Citrate is then isomerase and isocitrate. It is followed by the two successive steps of decarboxylation leading to the formation of alpha ketoglutaric acid and then succinyl-CoA. In the remaining step of citric acid cycle, succinyl-CoA is oxidized to OA, allowing the cycle to continue. During the conversion of succinyl-CoA to succinic acid, the molecule GTP is synthesized. This is the substrate level photophosphorylation. In a coupled reaction, GTP is converted to GTP with the simultaneous synthesis of ATP from the ATP. So first pyruvate, then acetyl coenzyme, then citric acid, then alpha ketoglutaric acid and succinic acid. The GTP converted GTP synthesis of ATP from ATP, NADP plus reduced to NADH plus H plus, and one part of the FAD plus reduced to FADH2. The cycle requires the continued replacement of the oxaloacetic acid, the first member of the cycle. In addition, it also requires regeneration of NAD plus and FAD plus from NADH and FADH2 respectively. The summary equation from this phase of respiration may be written as follows. Pyruvic acid plus 4 NAD plus FAD plus 2 H2O ADP plus PI, 3 CO2 plus 4 NADH plus 4H plus FADH2 plus ATP. We have till now seen that glucose has been broken down to release CO2 and 8 molecules of NADH plus H plus. 2 of FADH2 have been synthesized beside just 2 molecules of ATP. You may be wondering why we have been discussing respiration at all. Neither O2 has come into the picture nor the promised large number of ATP has yet been synthesized. Also the role of NADH plus H plus and FADH2 that is synthesized. Let us now understand the role of O2 in the respiration and how ATP is synthesized. Then that is enter into the electron transport chain. Okay, so this is up to further today. We will revise the chapter again, but you can revise the chapter in your room, and if you have any question from any chapter or any doubt, you can ask me or Samanthi ma'am. Okay, bye everyone.